Spartan Hoplite. If you are born a boy in Sparta, you do not really choose to become a soldier. The state chooses for you, before you can even talk. At age 7, you get taken from your family and placed into the Agoge, a brutal military training system. From that day, the army basically raises you instead of your parents. Your childhood disappears fast. You train constantly in combat, endurance, and survival. You are deliberately underfed, so you learn to steal food without getting caught. Getting caught stealing is not the crime. Getting caught failing is. Discipline matters more than comfort, more than family, more than your own body. By your 20s, you live in barracks, not at home, even after marriage. You eat in communal messes with fellow soldiers, sharing simple meals of black broth and barley. Your entire identity becomes the phalanx, a tight wall of shields and spears, where your survival depends completely on the men beside you. You carry a heavy bronze shield called an aspis. Losing it in battle is considered shameful beyond words. Spartan mothers reportedly tell their sons to come home carrying their shield or carried on it. However, here is the problem. Your life offers almost no personal freedom. You cannot choose your career, your home, or even most of your daily schedule. Failure in battle brings public disgrace that follows your entire family forever. Even worse, wars like the one at Thermopylae show exactly what is expected of you. Standing your ground against overwhelming odds, even certain death, is considered honorable duty, not tragedy. Eventually, constant warfare drains Sparta's population. Fewer sons are born into this brutal system each generation, until the mighty Spartan army simply runs out of soldiers to sacrifice. Roman legionary. In the Roman Republic, and later the Empire, joining the army becomes an actual career choice, not just a duty forced on you from birth. You sign up around age 20, committing to roughly 25 years of service. That is a massive chunk of your life handed straight to Rome. Your training is intense and repetitive. You march for miles carrying heavy equipment, practice sword drills constantly, and dig fortified camps every single night, even when nothing threatens you. Discipline defines everything. Officers punish laziness harshly, sometimes with beatings, sometimes with execution for serious offenses like desertion. You wear segmented armor, carry a large rectangular shield called a scutum, and fight in tight formations alongside 7 other men in your contubernium, essentially your small army family. You eat, march, and sleep together for years. Roman roads exist largely because of you. You build them, along with bridges, walls, and entire fortresses, whenever you are not actively fighting. Idle soldiers, Roman commanders believe, cause trouble, so you rarely stay idle for long. However, the reality of campaign life is brutal. You march incredible distances through freezing winters and scorching summers, carrying your own supplies. Disease kills more soldiers than actual battle in many campaigns. Wounds without modern medicine often turn fatal from infection alone. Unfortunately, pay arrives late constantly, and promised land grants after service sometimes never materialize, sparking outright mutinies among furious veterans. Even worse, your career depends entirely on which general commands you. Ambitious generals like Julius Caesar might march you against Rome itself during civil wars, forcing you to fight fellow Romans instead of foreign enemies, Mongol horsemen. To fight for the Mongol Empire, you grow up already prepared for war without realizing it. Mongol children learn horseback riding almost before walking properly. By your teenage years, you can shoot a composite bow accurately while galloping at full speed. This skill alone makes Mongol armies terrifyingly effective compared to almost anyone else on Earth. You own multiple horses, switching between them during long campaigns, so no single animal becomes exhausted. Your unit operates in tightly organized groups of 10, hundreds, and thousands, ensuring strict discipline even across enormous distances of open steppe and desert. Your daily life on campaign involves incredible mobility. You can travel far faster than most enemy armies, striking unexpectedly before retreating just as quickly. You eat dried meat, drink fermented mare's milk, and sleep in the open under harsh conditions most soldiers elsewhere never experience. However, Mongol warfare demands total obedience. Commanders like Genghis Khan enforce brutal discipline, sometimes executing entire units for failing missions, regardless of individual bravery shown by soldiers within them. Meanwhile, siege warfare against fortified cities proves genuinely difficult for horsemen accustomed to open plains. You often rely on captured engineers from China or Persia to build siege equipment you cannot construct yourselves. Even worse, cities that resist too fiercely, like Nishapur, sometimes face total annihilation as punishment, meaning you might be ordered to kill everyone inside. A horrifying task, regardless of how routine commanders make it seem. Eventually, the empire grows too vast to control effectively. Internal succession disputes fracture Mongol unity, and soldiers like you increasingly fight former allies instead of foreign enemies. Medieval Knight. Becoming a knight in medieval Europe requires years of preparation, usually starting around age 7 as a page in a nobleman's household. You learn horsemanship, basic combat, and proper courtly manners simultaneously. Around 14, you become a squire, serving an experienced knight directly, maintaining his weapons and armor while learning real battlefield skills. Your knighthood ceremony, when it finally arrives around age 21, involves a formal dubbing, often including an all-night vigil and religious blessing. From this moment, you swear oaths of loyalty to your lord, along with vague ideals of chivalry involving protecting the weak and behaving honorably. Your equipment is expensive. Full-plate armor, a warhorse, and quality weapons cost enormous sums, meaning knighthood essentially requires inherited wealth or land. You maintain this equipment constantly, since rust and damage can prove fatal in actual combat. However, real warfare looks nothing like romantic stories. You fight in muddy fields, wearing incredibly heavy armor that exhausts you quickly. Overheating inside metal armor during summer campaigns genuinely kills knights before enemies even reach them. Unfortunately, gunpowder eventually changes everything. Cannons and firearms make expensive armor increasingly useless against enemies who never even need noble training to kill you from a distance. Meanwhile, feudal obligations force you into wars you might personally disagree with, simply because your lord demands it. Refusing service can cost you your land, title, and social standing entirely. Even worse, capture during battle sometimes proves fortunate, since wealthy knights get ransomed rather than killed. Poorer soldiers fighting beside you enjoy no such protection, dying in numbers that rarely appear in romantic legends about knighthood. Ottoman Janissary. To become a Janissary in the Ottoman Empire, you likely never chose this path voluntarily. Through a system called devshirme, Ottoman officials take young Christian boys from conquered Balkan territories, converting them to Islam and training them as elite soldiers, loyal directly to the Sultan. Your childhood essentially ends the moment officials select you. You leave your family permanently, receiving intense military and religious education instead. Over years of training, you become part of one of history's most feared and disciplined military units, technically classified as slaves of the Sultan himself. You live in barracks, forbidden from marrying during active service in earlier centuries. Your entire identity centers on absolute loyalty to the Ottoman state, since you have no family land or inheritance competing for your attention. Janissaries pioneer effective use of firearms in Ottoman warfare, and your discipline, combined with early adoption of muskets, makes your unit devastatingly effective during major campaigns against European powers. However, this loyalty comes at enormous personal cost. You cannot pursue ordinary family life, own significant property, or leave military service easily. Your entire existence belongs to the state that essentially kidnapped you as a child. Unfortunately, as centuries pass, corruption spreads through Janissary ranks. Positions increasingly get inherited rather than earned, and military effectiveness declines noticeably compared to your elite predecessors. Even worse, When Sultan Mahmud II eventually decides Janissaries have grown too powerful and resistant to reform, he orders their violent destruction in 1826, an event remembered as the Auspicious Incident, ending centuries of Janissary tradition through brutal massacre. Aztec warrior. In Aztec society, becoming a respected warrior offers one of the few paths toward genuine social advancement, regardless of your birth status. You attend a school called the Telpuchkali, learning combat skills alongside religious duties from a young age, since warfare and religion remain deeply intertwined throughout Aztec culture. Your training emphasizes capturing enemies alive rather than simply killing them, since prisoners become essential for religious sacrifice. Successfully capturing enemy warriors earns you genuine prestige, elaborate clothing privileges, and potential membership in elite warrior societies like the Eagle or Jaguar warriors. You fight using a weapon called the makuahuitl, a wooden club embedded with sharp obsidian blades, capable of inflicting horrific wounds despite lacking metal construction. Your battlefield objective often prioritizes capture over kills, making combat genuinely more dangerous than straightforward killing would be. Flower wars, arranged conflicts specifically designed for capturing sacrificial victims rather than territorial conquest, represent a uniquely Aztec approach to warfare that you participate in regularly, alongside traditional campaigns of conquest. However, the religious weight of your profession creates constant psychological pressure. You genuinely believe cosmic order depends partly on the sacrifices your captured prisoners provide, meaning failure feels like spiritual catastrophe, not just military defeat. Unfortunately, being captured yourself carries a horrifying reciprocal fate. Enemy warriors who capture you might sacrifice you exactly as you intended for them, a fear that follows every battle you enter. Even worse, when Spanish conquistadors arrive carrying steel weapons, gunpowder, and diseases your body has never encountered, your traditional training proves tragically insufficient against enemies fighting by completely unfamiliar rules. Napoleonic soldier. Serving in Napoleon's Grande Armée means joining history's largest military force assembled up to that point. Built partly through conscription that sweeps up ordinary young men from across France and Allied territories, regardless of personal desire to fight. Your training happens quickly compared to older professional armies, since Napoleon relies on massive troop numbers combined with aggressive tactics rather than lengthy elite preparation. You march in tight columns, learn coordinated artillery support, and experience warfare transformed by mass conscription armies fighting across entire continents. Daily life on campaign involves exhausting marches covering enormous distances, since Napoleon's strategy depends heavily on rapid movement, catching enemies unprepared. You carry heavy packs, muskets, and minimal rations, often foraging from local populations along your route for additional food. Battles like Austerlitz showcase Napoleon's tactical brilliance, but standing in tightly packed infantry lines while artillery and musket fire tears through your ranks requires genuine courage that romantic paintings rarely capture accurately. However, the Russian campaign of 1812 reveals warfare's true horror. Freezing temperatures, starvation, and constant harassment from Russian forces destroy the Grande Armée far more effectively than direct battle ever could, killing hundreds of thousands during the retreat alone. Unfortunately, medical care remains primitive throughout your service. Wounds that modern medicine easily treats routinely become fatal infections, and battlefield surgery, when available at all, involves horrifying procedures without effective anesthesia. Even worse, after years of brutal campaigning across Europe, ultimate defeat at Waterloo in 1815 ends Napoleon's empire entirely, leaving surviving veterans like you to return home to a France that has fundamentally changed during your absence. World War I soldier. Fighting in the First World War means experiencing warfare transformed by industrial technology into something previous soldiers could barely imagine. You likely enlist enthusiastically, perhaps believing propaganda promising quick victory, only to discover trench warfare grinding on for years with minimal territorial change. Your daily existence centers on trenches, muddy ditches stretching for hundreds of miles across battlefields in France and Belgium. You live alongside rats, lice, and constant dampness, developing painful conditions like trench foot from standing in water for extended periods without relief. Machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery transform traditional infantry charges into horrifying slaughter. Battles like the Somme in 1916 produced staggering casualties within single days, as soldiers advanced directly into concentrated defensive fire that older tactical doctrines never anticipated properly. Poison gas introduces entirely new terror. Chlorine and mustard gas attacks cause agonizing deaths or permanent injuries, forcing you to carry gas masks constantly, never knowing when the next attack might arrive without warning. However, psychological trauma proves just as devastating as physical injury. Shell shock, what modern medicine now recognizes as severe combat trauma, affects countless soldiers, though military authorities initially dismiss it as cowardice, rather than genuine psychological injury deserving treatment. Unfortunately, communication between frontline soldiers and commanding officers often breaks down completely, leading to catastrophic tactical decisions made without understanding actual battlefield conditions you experience directly. Even worse, 4 years of brutal stalemate warfare ultimately produces roughly 20 million total deaths, leaving an entire generation of young men across Europe either dead or permanently changed by experiences no previous soldiers had ever faced. Modern soldier. Serving in a modern professional army looks dramatically different from every previous era, though genuine hardship certainly has not disappeared. You typically volunteer rather than getting conscripted, undergoing extensive specialized training in everything from marksmanship to advanced technology operation before ever deploying anywhere. Your equipment includes sophisticated body armor, night vision technology, and communication systems previous soldiers could never have imagined. Medical care improves dramatically too, with survival rates for serious injuries far exceeding anything possible during earlier conflicts throughout history. However, modern warfare introduces entirely new challenges. You might operate in unfamiliar countries, facing insurgency tactics, roadside explosives, and enemies who blend seamlessly into civilian populations, making traditional battlefield distinctions increasingly difficult to maintain safely. Deployments separate you from family for extended periods, sometimes repeatedly across multiple tours, straining relationships and creating genuine emotional difficulty for both soldiers and families left waiting anxiously at home throughout your absence. Unfortunately, post-traumatic stress disorder affects significant numbers of modern veterans, a psychological toll that military institutions increasingly acknowledge, though adequate treatment and support remain ongoing challenges even within wealthy, technologically advanced nations. Meanwhile, media coverage and public scrutiny create additional pressure unknown to historical soldiers. Every action potentially gets recorded, analyzed, and debated publicly, adding accountability that previous generations of soldiers never had to consider during their own service. Even with incredible technological advantages protecting you compared to historical soldiers, the fundamental reality remains unchanged. You still face genuine danger, prolonged separation from loved ones, and psychological burdens that no amount of modern equipment can completely eliminate from military service. Across every army throughout history, soldiers faced brutal training, harsh discipline, and constant danger, whether fighting with bronze spears, steel swords, muskets, or modern rifles. However, the equipment always changed, while the fundamental sacrifice remained the same. Every soldier, regardless of era or empire, gave up personal freedom, risked permanent injury, and lived under the constant weight of orders they rarely controlled themselves.